Stepmom tried selling our family ring for her son's death. I got it back and she lost everything. My name's Kyle. I'm 26. And to be honest, I'm still in shock over what I just found out. Picture this. Our family had this one ring. Not just any ring, a relic. Passed down through generations until it reached my dad. My grandma always went on about how it wasn't just a trinket, but a connection between generations. A piece of our souls, and all that honestly beautiful nonsense. When I was a kid, I was just plain in love with this chunk of gold. I mean, it sparkled like something out of an old movie. And how did we get it? Oh, one of those classic family legends full of fateful twists and other nonsense. When my grandma passed, my dad, with his so-called endless trust in his new wife, gave her the ring, hoping she'd guard it as if it were the last diamond on earth. I, however, have one rule. If something seems too good to be true, it probably is. And my stepmother's behavior was starting to smell off. At first, I shrugged it off. Maybe she just didn't really think about the ring. But when her forgetfulness started bordering on well-crafted acting, my gut started screaming. You know that feeling when you think, she might be up to something? And then one day, I accidentally overheard her on the phone, and everything clicked. She wasn't just up to something. She was planning to sell the ring. Yes, our family relic, which, if you believed my grandma's stories, literally lit our path from the days of Queen Victoria. And why? To cover her darling son Greg's debts. Ah, Greg, the king of screw-ups and constant debts. Let me tell you about this guy. Greg is the type who buys a flashy car just to look cool, only to realize he doesn't have a dime to pay for it. The guy spends on whatever he considers an investment, and then acts all surprised when, oh wow, he can't pay his rent. I can just picture him thinking, oh, maybe I should borrow money. What's the harm? I'm cool anyway. And my stepmother decided that our family's ring, yes, families, was the perfect currency to save his sorry hide. Are you kidding me? I exclaimed internally when it finally hit me that she was serious about going through with it. When I confronted her about the ring, it was like tossing a stone into a perfectly still pond. Not even a flicker in her expression, as if I were speaking in some foreign tongue she'd never heard. She was the picture of that poker face everyone talks about. But I could see the tension smoldering just below the surface, her eyes betraying the heat of an unspoken fire. On the outside, cold as a glacier. Kyle, who do you think you are? She sneered, with that tone that's usually reserved for catching someone breaking her prized possessions. Her face twisted just enough to convey that I was nothing more than an inconvenience, as though I were some rebellious kid pushing boundaries. But I'd had enough of her looks. They didn't faze me anymore. The ring's in the safe, she announced, tone clipped and impersonal, like she was ordering the help to clean up a spill. Then she added with a forced nonchalance, You're overthinking. Yeah, sure. Her little jab at my so-called overthinking only confirmed she was hiding something, trying way too hard to maintain her facade. I shot her a look, studying her like she was a museum exhibit that looks pristine from a distance, but is riddled with hidden flaws on closer inspection. Keep pretending, I thought, half smirking to myself. That ridiculous little exchange was a joke, but it was all I needed. I went to check the safe, knowing deep down I wouldn't find the ring there. And surprise, surprise, it wasn't. The moment was almost comical, like she thought I'd just swallow her story without a second thought. Right then, I felt a switch flip inside me. I was in mission mode, fully aware this was the point of no return. That ring was coming back to me, one way or another. And something told me this time my stepmother wasn't going to enjoy it. First, I needed to dig into just how far this disaster went. Turns out my dear stepbrother Greg isn't just a mess. He's the whole circus, a walking cliché of failed dreams and tragic spending habits. He's like a wannabe big shot in some off-brand reality show, where the luxury scenes are poorly lit and the cars are on loan. His money management? A sad story. He throws cash at flashy cars he can't keep, gadgets he barely knows how to turn on, and of course, a revolving door of women who see through his charade in record time. It's hilarious, really. They take one look, spot the red flags, and vanish. Greg, predictably, ends up alone, wondering where it all went wrong while I'm watching from the sidelines. And my stepmother? She plays this bizarre role of cheerleader, accountant, and lifeline, as if Greg is her golden child. She's constantly sweeping his messes under the rug, thinking he'll somehow magically transform into a stable, reliable man. The best part? She actually calls him her rock. Imagine trusting Greg, of all people, to be your security blanket. She's trying to carry water in a sieve and wondering why she's soaked. The irony was almost too rich. Here's her lifeline sinking under his own idiocy, and she's still there, throwing herself into the financial quicksand with him. Once I saw just how much of a blind spot Greg was for her, I knew I had her. If Golden Boy needed rescuing, she'd dive in without thinking twice. That's when I decided my plan would need a bit of style. It wasn't just about getting that ring back. That was only the spark. I wanted a show. Her little world built on illusions would come crashing down. I'd be the spectator, hands folded, watching it all burn, but with my finger always hovering over that destroy it all button. The beauty of it was she'd never see it coming. Too busy trying to bail Greg out to realize she'd sunk herself in the process. This was about more than a ring. This was about watching the entire charade collapse piece by piece, right under her nose. I decided to play the good guy, leaning into the role like I was auditioning for the part of the century. It was pure performance art. For a few weeks, I completely abandoned my usual suspicious glare, replaced it with a look of mild concern, and wore a mask of empathy. I even let my voice soften, lowered my guard, and approached my stepmother with the gentlest expression I could muster. The act went a little like this. You know, I'm actually starting to worry about Greg. I mean, he's my brother, even if just by marriage. I gave her the I'm just doing my family duty tone, throwing in a subtle hint of nobility as if I were about to receive a prize for sibling loyalty. And the best part? She bought it without a second thought. She let out this exaggerated sigh of relief, like I'd just lifted a 100-pound weight off her shoulders. Clearly, she was so desperate for validation that her mind skipped right over any warning, this could be a trap alerts. In our concerned family member conversations, I somehow turned into her new confidant, the only one who understood the situation. "Kyle, you're such a good guy," she'd say, with this sappy look like she'd just discovered some lost treasure. I had to bite back a laugh. Apparently, I was a good guy now. Who knew? She opened up like a book after that, telling me everything in painstaking detail. It got to the point where I knew more about her shady transactions than she probably remembered herself. From the name of the buyer to the exact date and time of the sale, every last piece of intel was handed to me on a silver platter. Honestly, those chats started feeling like therapy sessions, except I wasn't the one getting helped. She'd go on, spilling every detail she'd been guarding so carefully, and all I had to do was nod sympathetically, maybe toss in a, "Really? That must be so tough." Meanwhile, in her naive mind, she thought I'd actually do nothing with this information. Naivete is almost charming in some cases, but in hers it was outright lethal. The night before the sale, I was practically buzzing with adrenaline, but I knew what I had to do. I slipped into her office, feeling like I was stepping into enemy territory, every sense on high alert. No need for a disguise or grand theatrics, just me, moving quietly through her so-called sanctuary, knowing she'd never suspect a thing. She thought I was too busy worrying about Greg to even consider poking around her stuff. That misplaced confidence? Her first mistake. The documents were right there, perfectly organized in her desk, as if they'd been waiting for me. The official sale papers lay open, flaunting every detail. The buyer's name, the exact transaction date, the payment terms, and every other little piece of ammunition I needed to orchestrate a family council showdown. This was just the first step. I scanned each line, memorizing it all, then slipped the papers back into their pristine spot, leaving no trace I'd even been there. But I wasn't stopping at intel. The ring, still in her possession and waiting to be handed over to the buyer, gave me the perfect opening to escalate things. I found the buyer's contact details and made a call. I masked my intentions, dropping just enough charm and mystery to keep him interested. We scheduled an earlier meetup, and I threw in a sweetener. A marginally better offer, enough to make his eyes widen, but not so much that it raised questions. When we met, I extended my hand and, with a confident grin, said, "Look, let's keep this simple. Family drama? You don't want it, and neither do I. Just take the deal, and everyone stays happy." The guy looked at me, a mix of relief and greed flickering across his face. For him, the ring was nothing more than a flashy piece of metal, a shiny trinket that happened to come with a nice payday. The more zeros on the check, the bigger his smile grew. I barely had to say another word. He was already sold. It was almost too easy. The next day, my stepmother strode off to meet the buyer, with all the confidence of someone who thinks they've pulled the ultimate power move. I could practically see her mentally patting herself on the back, probably dreaming up ways to spend her triumph money to rescue her golden son from his never-ending mess. But when she arrived, that confidence hit a wall. The buyer looked at her with a polite, almost apologetic smile, then dropped the line that turned her world upside down. "Sorry, I found a better offer." You could see the shock ripple through her, like someone had pulled the rug out from under her feet. Her face? Priceless. She was trying so hard to keep her composure, but her eyes widened, then narrowed, and she just stared at him, as if he'd vanished into thin air, leaving her to deal with the mess. Her face twitched, and I imagine her brain was scrambling to figure out how this foolproof plan had unraveled so quickly. When she finally stormed back home, her face was flushed with a fury I hadn't seen before. Red with rage, almost trembling. And there I was, waiting for her, lounging calmly in the armchair, spinning the ring between my fingers. The look on her face when she saw me holding it, worth every second of planning. She froze mid-step, eyes locked on the ring, and in that instant, all the color drained from her face. She went from furious to ghostly pale, standing there like a statue, mouth slightly open. I lifted the ring slowly, letting it catch the light as I turned it, and couldn't help the satisfied grin creeping across my face. "Surprise, surprise," I said, savoring every word, my voice laced with the perfect mix of sarcasm and triumph. I got up, closing the distance between us, moving slowly and deliberately, just to let the suspense build. Leaning in close, I whispered, my voice barely above a murmur, but enough to send a shiver down her spine. "You have no idea what you've done." I watched as her expression shifted from shock to utter confusion. She opened her mouth, probably to say something, but nothing came out. She was completely at a loss, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. This moment, seeing her cornered and speechless, was just the beginning. It took every ounce of restraint not to burst out laughing right there, watching her struggle to process what had just happened. She stood there, desperately trying to regain control, but it was clear she'd already lost. The ring, the sale, her carefully laid plans, all unraveling right in front of her. And this was just the start. With the ring back in my possession, I knew the next phase had to be carefully crafted. Something that would leave my stepmother absolutely devastated. First on the list, my dad. I found him in his study, surrounded by the trophies of a life built on hard work and trust, and I knew this would hit him where it hurt most. When I started explaining, his initial reaction was disbelief. He stared at me as if I were recounting some twisted fairy tale. "Your trusted wife," I began, almost pawned off our family heirloom to drag Greg out of his latest financial mess. The disbelief on his face slowly gave way to something darker. Every word I said chipped away at his conviction that she was loyal to the family. By the time I finished, his face was tense, his hands clenched. To drive it all home, I placed the ring in front of him, silent, letting the truth of it settle in. This wasn't a misunderstanding or some wild accusation. This was cold, undeniable reality. He stared at the ring, his face a mix of shock and betrayal, like he was looking at a piece of his past being sold off without a second thought. After a long silence, his expression shifted. His eyes hardened. I could see it. He'd made his choice. "You know what, Kyle?" he finally said, his voice steady but cold. The tone alone was enough to seal her fate. The weight of their years together couldn't soften the fact that she had crossed an unforgivable line. Selling off a piece of our heritage just to patch up Greg's mess? That was it for him. There was no coming back from this. And things only escalated from there. My dad didn't keep it quiet either. It didn't take long before family friends got wind of it, that my stepmother had tried to secretly cash in on the family treasure, something she had no right to touch. In our circles, that kind of betrayal doesn't just blow over. People don't forgive someone willing to compromise, not only their integrity, but the very values that hold the family together. All to save a man who'd proven time and again he didn't understand the meaning of honor. Her reputation shattered like glass, fast and loud. Whispers turned into open disdain, and doors that were once open to her slammed shut. Social gatherings became icy. People she thought were allies looked through her, and the pity she once commanded turned to contempt. And Greg? With no one left to bail him out, he sank back into his old pattern, only now without any sympathy. Soon, he was just another forgotten name, irrelevant and broke. The golden boy reduced to dust. In the end, the two of them got exactly what they deserved. My stepmother was left with absolutely nothing. No money, no respect, not even those fake friends who used to butter her up over coffee or for a chance to flaunt connections. She became practically a ghost. People who used to smile at her now barely noticed her on the street. Her reputation? Yeah, that shiny thing was in ruins. And the ring? It's back with me, right where it belongs. I have no idea how she even thought she had any right to it. Neither she nor her utterly useless son had a chance of grasping anything that was never theirs. Every time I look at the ring, I feel this immense satisfaction. It's not just jewelry anymore. It's a symbol, a reminder that actions have consequences, even if you don't believe in justice. It doesn't always come as a judge or a knight in shining armor. Sometimes justice looks exactly like this, a guy who's just had enough of lies and betrayal. The irony is, she destroyed herself, and I only sped up the process. So now, this ring isn't just a relic. It's a reminder. Every time I see it, I think, yeah, sometimes the world really does line things up fairly. Through pain, betrayal, and the self-destructive choices people drag into their lives.